For the first time in what felt like forever, the town of Oakhaven could finally breathe again. The rats were gone, every last one of them wiped out after a season of pure, relentless horror. The squealing and scratching that had burrowed into their nights, that constant, gnawing fear that became a part of them, it was all replaced by silence so complete, felt wrong. The townsfolk had fought a war and somehow they'd won. They patched the holes in their walls, buried their dead, and lied to themselves that the nightmare was over. But silence can be a liar. And as the sun set on their hard-won peace, the shadows in Oakhaven began to move in a rhythm that had no musician. To really get what that silence meant, you have to understand the noise that came first. Oakhaven wasn't just infested, it was being eaten alive. It started small, a rustle in the attic, a flicker of movement in the corner of your eye, but in just a few weeks it became a full-blown tide of filth and teeth. And these weren't ordinary rats. They were bigger, smarter, and they looked at you with a kind of hatred that felt personal. History has always linked rats to ruin and sickness. They're the bringers of plague, a living symbol of a world falling apart. The people of Oakhaven didn't need history books. They were living in their own dark age. The whole thing felt like a terrifying echo of the Black Death, where fleas carried bacteria on the backs of rats, brought an entire continent to its knees. That same primal fear had its teeth in the town. Food pantries were emptied overnight, leaving nothing but droppings and the smell of rot. Livestock was torn apart in the fields. Kids were locked indoors, their parents terrified of the swarming numbers and the diseases they carried. The town threw everything they had at them: traps, poison, late-night hunts with torches and shovels. Every single day was a battle. That shared trauma forged a strange, grim unity. They were all soldiers in a war against a chittering, unstoppable enemy. When the last rat was finally confirmed dead, the relief was so total you could almost feel it in the air. They thought they had faced their monster and destroyed it. They celebrated, believing they had cleaned the darkness out of their quiet little town. They were wrong. The rats were never the real disease. They were just the first symptom. That first week of peace was all about picking up the pieces. People started coming out of their homes, blinking in the sun, learning how to trust the quiet again. You see neighbours helping each other fix gnawed-through floorboards and splintered doors. The constant hum of anxiety that had lived under the surface for so long finally started to fade. Life was getting back to normal, but then the little things started happening. Things that didn't add up. It started with the shadows. A man painting his fence would look down and see his shadow stretch, just for a heartbeat, into a long, twisting shape that wasn't his. He'd shake his head, blame it on the angle of the sun, on the stress. A woman hanging her laundry could see a dark, fleeting shape pass over the clean white sheets, but when she looked up, a perfectly clear sky. They were just little things, easy to brush off. When a whole town goes through something like that, you expect people to be a little jumpy. The town doctor called it plague shock, telling folks it was just tricks of a weary mind. It was a lot easier to believe your own mind was playing tricks on you than to think about the alternative. The shadows were just shadows. That's what they told themselves. But deep down, a new kind of dread was starting to grow. This wasn't the heart's messy fear of a rat bite. It was a cold, creeping feeling, the kind that whispers that the world isn't working the way it's supposed to. The sound started about 2 weeks after the last rat was gone. It was close to midnight when Oakhaven was wrapped in that new silence it treasured so much. A lone night watchman doing his rounds was the first to hear it. A single, crystal clear note from a pipe, hanging in the cold air for a moment before disappearing. It was musical, but it made the hairs on his arms stand up. He scanned the empty street, nothing. He told himself that it was the wind, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the note had been played just for him. A few nights later, an old woman heard it too, a short, haunting melody that seemed to drift right through her window. It wasn't coming from anywhere in particular, it was just there. She told her son, but he just patted her hand and blamed it on her old age and lonely nights. A little boy woke up screaming that the music man was outside, but his parents just said it was a nightmare. Everyone knows the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. A town hires a stranger to get rid of their rats, he does, and then the town refuses to pay him. So in revenge, the piper plays his tune again and leads all the children away, never to be seen again. But the people of Oakhaven had paid their dues. They paid in blood and terror. They hadn't made a deal with any mysterious stranger. So why did those faint, ghostly notes feel like a bill coming due? Another week passed, and the weird little oddities weren't so little anymore. The shadows weren't just playing tricks. They started moving with a purpose that was impossible to ignore. People would watch the shadow of a tree peel itself off the trunk, slither across a lawn, and then snap back into place. In dimly lit houses, the shadows of chairs and tables would bleed in the middle of the floor, swirling like black ink in water. You could almost feel them, a cold spot in the air as one passed over you. At the same time, the piper's music got bolder. It wasn't just a single note anymore. Now it was a whole song, played every single night as soon as the sun went down. It was a strange, hypnotic melody that you could hear all over town, and it seemed to pull at something inside you. There was no denying it now. It was a nightly concert from a musician no one could see. The fear in Oakhaven changed. It went from a quiet dread to a sharp, immediate terror. One evening, a man named Thomas, the guy who'd led the extermination efforts, saw his own shadow stop following him. It just stood there, in the middle of the road, as he walked away. Frozen with a fear colder than anything the rats had made him feel, he watched his own dark shape slowly turn its head to look at him. In that exact moment, the piper's song swelled loud and clear, and it sounded like it was coming from the shadow itself. Thomas screamed and ran, and didn't stop until he was behind 3 deadbolts. The peace was gone. They'd beaten a monster they could see, only to invite in something so much worse. It all came to a head on a moonless, starless night. The air was thick and still, buzzing with a feeling that something was about to break. As the church bell struck midnight, the piper's music started. But this time, it wasn't some distant echo. It was a full-blown symphony of dread that poured into every home, a physical vibration that you could feel in your bones. And then the shadows came out to play. From every dark alley, from beneath every car, from the deep black of the forest edge, they poured out. They weren't just patches of darkness anymore. They had pulled themselves together, stretching into tall, thin figures that were almost human. Their limbs were too long, their joints bent all wrong, and they had no faces, just a perfect, light, swallowing void. The people of Oakhaven, paralysed by a fear beyond anything the rats inspired, just watched from behind their curtains. Nobody screamed. The music held them all captive, a silent audience for a terrifying show. The shadow things glided into the town square, and under the sickly glow of the streetlights, they began to dance. It wasn't a joyful dance, it was a silent, synchronized ritual, their movements flowing in perfect time to the piper's haunting song. They swayed and twisted, their black forms weaving together in a macabre ballet. They weren't attacking, they weren't even threatening, they were just performing, and that was the real horror. The people of Oakhaven finally understood they weren't part of this story. They were just the audience. The piper hadn't come to take something from them. He'd come to put on a show, and this silent, empty dance was the main event. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, the music faded, one note at a time, until only a single high note remained. Then nothing. The shadow figures faltered, their dance broken. They dissolved, melting back into the darkness they'd come from, until the town square was empty again. The silence that fell over Oakhaven was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence of victory, it was a heavy, suffocating silence filled with the shared memory of what they had all just seen. Not a single person was hurt. Not a single window was broken. The only thing different was that 2,000 people were now bound together by the same unspeakable nightmare. The sun came up, but no one felt safe. They knew night would fall again, and they knew the piper would play. Pied Piper legend is a story about punishing a town for a broken promise. But what promise did Oakhaven break? Or was getting rid of the rats the mistake? Maybe they upset some kind of dark balance in the shadows of the price. The rats were a grotesque warning, sure, but the piper's song is the real performance, and it feels like it's just getting started. The question now that hangs over the terrified town isn't if the piper will return, but what he'll expect for an encore. What do you think the piper wants? Is this a punishment or something else entirely? Let us know your theories in the comments. And for more stories about the strange things that linger in the dark corners of the world, make sure you subscribe. You don't want to be left alone when the music starts.